Hello everyone, I'm Albert, and this is my self-development podcast, Albert Talks. Today we'll talk about a problem that's familiar to almost everyone, yet still surrounded by myths, misconceptions, and confusion about how to fight it. We'll discuss imposter syndrome, that feeling when you believe your successes are undeserved and you're never doing enough. It can affect anyone at any age or position, whether they're a janitor or a president. And paradoxically, often the more a person achieves, the more they doubt their accomplishments. Even one of America's most outstanding presidents, Abraham Lincoln, suffered from something very similar to what we now recognize as imposter syndrome. But why does this feeling arise even in successful people? What does it lead to? And most importantly, how can we effectively combat it? These are the questions we'll answer today. Let's start with what it is and why it's called that. In the late 70s, psychologists studied a behavioral phenomenon where people, despite obvious achievements or even outstanding success, continued to suffer from low self-esteem and labeled themselves as failures and imposters. That's when the term imposter syndrome entered common usage. These people, like with an illness, exhibit several main symptoms. First is the fear of exposure. When you feel that any success is a fragile screen behind which hides someone who knows nothing and understands nothing, even when that's not true. Second is constant anxiety and the resulting perfectionism, constant checking of your work and attempts to perfect it, along with the accompanying burnout. For some people, this manifests as an inability to finish or, for example, publish their work, considering it insufficiently perfect and not meeting imaginary criteria that constantly rise and become more complex. For others, it's simply reluctance to take on a new project, job, or study something desired and important but new. After all, the person is already convinced they won't cope, even if they're competent in the matter, so they simply avoid the work. Third is doubt about the right to success or wealth, if we're talking about money as a measure of achievement and success. The person doesn't rejoice in their victories and attributes all they have not to their own merits, but to luck or fate. Fourth is constant self-sabotage. Procrastination, a lifestyle leading to depressive episodes, or as I mentioned, postponing tasks or complete refusal of anything new. This combination leads to a person psychologically backing themselves into a corner. On one hand, they want recognition, but on the other, they internally don't believe they really have the right to it. Because of this, it becomes difficult to calmly enjoy work, take pleasure in your own successes, and move forward. The causes of origin are different for everyone, but similar in their own way. So get ready to count on your fingers. First is family upbringing. In childhood, many of us heard phrases like, "Why not an A+? You could do better. You should always be the best in class," and so on. The overachiever syndrome, in other words. Parents in this model, of course, want their child to develop and become better than they are. But this approach often reinforces the belief that my successes don't meet others' expectations. I'm always falling short of the ideal, and so on. And in general, they instill the habit of constantly comparing and contrasting yourself. And this, especially in the era of social media, becomes the second catalyst for the problem. On social media, everyone competes to share beautiful and often embellished moments of life. This creates the impression that everyone around is perfect people, all millionaires, gurus and everything, and you're the only loser. And if a person absorbed negative parental attitudes in childhood, this becomes a vicious cycle of self-humiliation, because the person probably won't have any protective tolerance against comparing themselves to others, since their self-esteem was already undermined by their parents. But of course, this is also contributed to by stereotypes and personal differences like strict frameworks. Women, for example, often experience imposter syndrome more intensely due to a long history of gender prejudices when their professionalism was often questioned by default. And the habit of perfectionism characterizes any imperfection as failure. Let's say you've successfully completed 90% of the work, but you fixate on the remaining 10%, and all successes are reduced to zero precisely because of this fragment. But this state, like any deep-seated beliefs, is a habit of thinking and behavior. After all, our consciousness over time learns to adapt and get used to exactly the environment that was frequently encountered, and therefore familiar and comfortable. And you can get used to something else, albeit with enormous difficulty. But how exactly do you do this? First, you need to understand and begin getting rid of imposed parental or other attitudes that interfere with your normal life. You need to start with mindfulness practices and everything aimed at reducing overall anxiety levels and helping with a more detailed understanding of your feelings and thoughts. The thing is, you'll never completely get rid of negative thoughts that can overcome you at any inappropriate moment. They'll be your guest quite often, but your task, to use an analogy, is to build a large filter between their appearance and your subsequent actions. In short, learn to analyze them, ask them questions, and react in a way more suitable for you, rather than mindlessly listening to them and obeying thoughts that you're, for example, a failure and urgently need to abandon your life's project. Many people not only don't have this filter, they don't understand their feelings. Therefore, incorporate meditation practices or other breathing practices into your life, where you'll focus and watch, like a spectator, your thoughts. Keep a journal of your thoughts. Write them down in a notebook or other recording means. Through these or other methods, you're training yourself that thoughts aren't always you and they're not always about you, and you don't always need to follow them. You first need to track and study them. Look at yourself from a third-person perspective before letting them through. If we're talking about childhood attitudes, mindfulness practices contribute to more effective transactional analysis. The fact is that our frequently repeated thoughts and attitudes turn into our internal alternative personalities with different roles, which try to take over your voice. You've probably heard of the concept of the inner child, which hides our happiness, joy of life, and creativity. But it's also assumed that there's an inner adult and parent. The adult is logic and our responsibility, and the parent is our care. And if our parents were critical, our inner parent is endowed with the same traits, who will constantly point out mistakes and suppress the voices of the logical adult and cheerful child. Observing thoughts, writing them down, and analyzing helps over time to begin determining whose thoughts are whose, and switching all internal criticism to the adult position. That is, more objective and rational, thanks to which we can either get rid of criticism and soften negative messages, or even turn it into our strengths. That is, answering the question of how to deal with this problem. Listen to, rather than just hear, your thoughts, and only after analyzing them, make decisions, or discard some altogether. Look at yourself from the outside, but not with criticism, but with the goal of studying and directing in the right direction. As if you're playing a game where you look at the main character from the side and all your actions are aimed at improving their experience, resources, and condition. And this main character is you. And to reinforce this experience, keep your own journal, not just of thoughts if they're necessary, but also a journal of your own achievements, gratitudes. Record every success, every victory, and write what emotions you experienced from it. Be grateful for it. Even if it seems strange and ridiculous, it's very useful because, as we said about imposter syndrome being a habit of thinking, we're thus instilling in ourselves the habit of seeing the strong and good in ourselves, which over time will change absolutely everything in your life, like curing a person of color blindness. And if you're lazy, you don't always have to write by hand. You can use audio recordings on your phone with transcription, dictation, and so on. And of course, try to surround yourself with like-minded people who will help you deal with this problem or will have the worldview and thinking you desire. We also have our own closed community where we communicate warmly, meet in real life, find new acquaintances and friends, and every month we organize challenges to improve ourselves and our lives. For example, last June we took contrast and cold showers for a month, and this June we kept gratitude journals every day. Moreover, research shows that communicating in a group of people with similar problems, when you hear someone voicing exactly the same fears while externally seeming competent to you, has a very powerful beneficial effect. So, the link will be in the podcast description. Be sure to join. Besides that, there are several techniques that can help. Remember them all. First is intentional mistakes. We talked about this in previous episodes. To overcome paralyzing perfectionism, you need to develop tolerance for the imperfect. And a small spoiler, a confident person isn't someone who takes on everything and does everything perfectly, but someone who even looks at their failure with such unshakable smile and charisma that no one would dare suggest it's a failure. Therefore, try consciously doing something imperfectly. Leave a typo in a text, stumble in a voice message to your friend or recording, misspeak in conversation with someone, and so on. Things that are excessively important only to you and where only you notice the mistakes. And of course, take care of yourself and your body. Often, imposter syndrome provokes, and subsequently is provoked by, excessive anxiety and psycho-emotional stress. It's not often talked about in this context, but fatigue and anxiety intensify if you're chronically sleep-deprived, constantly tired, or have a movement deficit. Regular physical activity, even simple 20-minute walks a day, help normalize hormonal balance, reduce stress hormone levels, and strengthen self-confidence. And regular moderate physical activity in the gym, at home, or outside significantly affects mental state. After all, if we look at our society and generation, most of our problems come from low activity and mobility. Therefore, remember, imposter syndrome isn't a sentence. It's just a special knot in your thinking that fortunately can be untied. And although it will take a lot of time and effort, it will be rewarded with inner freedom and confidence, as well as a healthier relationship with yourself and your achievements. And finally, remember that you're not alone. I'm exactly the same. But as you can hear, I'm handling it excellently. And as soon as you start taking even the smallest steps to improve awareness in yourself, including physically, you'll begin to unlock your potential and everything will fall into place. Like, for example, the fact that you need to subscribe to my YouTube and Telegram, where I'm called Albert Everywhere. This is a very important place, and you've been listening to the Albert Talks podcast. Be confident in yourself, value yourself and your achievements, and all the best to you.